Let's talk about the single most important chemical reaction on Earth. Seriously, it's a process that powers pretty much all life, literally builds massive forests out of thin air, and, creates the oxygen we're all breathing right now. We are talking about photosynthesis.
All right, let's just jump right in with a question to get you thinking. Picture a huge 20-ton oak tree. Where did all that stuff actually come from? All the wood, the bark, the leaves? I mean, the obvious answer is the ground, right? It's got to be sucking all that mass up from the soil. But is it really that simple?
Okay, here's the mind-blowing answer. The vast majority of that tree's mass comes from the air. Yep, it's built from carbon dioxide, a gas that the tree pulls straight out of the atmosphere. Now, don't get me wrong, the soil is absolutely essential for water and minerals. But the actual carbon building blocks for that 20-ton giant, they came from the air. And the engine that pulls off this incredible magic trick is photosynthesis.
So, how in the world does this planetary power source actually work? Well, at its very core, it's all about changing energy from one form to another, and it does it on a scale that's just hard to even comprehend.
Here's the basic recipe boiled down. A plant takes in two simple ingredients, carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil. Then it uses the energy from sunlight as the oven to cook them up and rearrange them into two new things, glucose, which is a sugar that's basically the plant's food and its Lego bricks, and oxygen, which for the plant is just a waste product, but for us, well, it's kind of everything.
And the place where this all happens is a tiny little engine inside the plant cells called the chloroplast. Now, the key word here is transducer. A chloroplast isn't just a passive little green blob. It is a seriously sophisticated piece of microscopic machinery. Think of it like a tiny factory that takes in light energy, which is fleeting, and converts it into stable, storable chemical energy in the form of sugar. So, let's do that. Let's take a tour inside one of these little green factories and see just how brilliantly they're designed. The internal setup is genius. You've got these things called thylakoid membranes, which are basically the assembly lines, and they're studded with the solar panels that capture the light. These are stacked up into what are called grana, which just creates a massive surface area to soak up as much sun as possible. The whole operation takes place in this fluid-filled space, the stroma. That's the factory floor. And get this, the factory even has its own DNA, so it can build its own replacement parts on site. It's a completely self-contained operation.
The whole process really plays out in two main acts. Act 1 is all about the energy. It's about capturing raw power from the sun and turning it into a form the factory can actually use.
The real heroes of this act are the pigments. Chlorophyll A is the star of the show. It's right at the heart of the reaction. But it doesn't work alone. It's got a whole support crew of what we call accessory pigments, like chlorophyll B and carotenoids. Their job is to grab colors of light that chlorophyll A might otherwise miss and funnel that energy over to the main event. It's a team effort, making sure not a single ray of sunlight goes to waste.
Okay, but how can we be so sure about which colors are the most important? I mean, how did scientists figure this out? It turns out they did it in a really clever way.
And this right here is the proof. It's beautiful. Scientists measured two things. First, which colors of light do the pigments actually absorb? That gives you the absorption spectrum. Then, they measured how well photosynthesis actually works under different colors of light. That's the action spectrum. And what they found was that the two graphs match almost perfectly. There are these huge peaks of activity in blue and red light, and a massive dip right in the green area. This tells us something crucial. Plants look green to us because they reflect green light. They don't use it.
So let's follow the energy. First, a photon of light smacks into a solar panel called photosystem 2. And bam! An electron gets super energized. To replace that lost electron, the plant splits a water molecule. And that right there is where all the oxygen we breathe comes from. That energized electron then gets passed down a chain, like a hot potato, powering these tiny pumps along the way. The pumps create a gradient of protons, and as those protons flow back through this incredible molecular turbine called ATP synthase, it generates ATP, the universal energy currency for the cell. Finally, the now tired electron gets another jolt of light at photosystem I, and its energy is stored in a second battery-like molecule, NADPH. So at the end of Act 1, the factory has made its two power packs, ATP and NADPH. Now this factory is smart. The main process we just walked through is the standard, non-cyclic pathway. But sometimes, the next stage of the operation needs a little more ATP than NADPH. When that happens, the plant can switch to a cyclic mode. The electrons just loop around photosystem 1, focusing only on pumping more protons to make extra ATP. It's a flexible power grid that can adjust to demand. Pretty cool, right?
And that brings us to Act 2. Our power packs, ATP, and NADPH are fully charged. Now it's time to head over to the factory floor, the stroma, and actually build something. This is the assembly line. This assembly line is called the Calvin cycle, and its whole mission is to do that thing we talked about at the beginning, to take carbon from CO2 in the air and fix it into a solid organic molecule. In other words, a sugar. This is the moment where the captured sunlight energy finally gets locked into the chemical bonds of food.
It happens in 3 basic steps. First, an enzyme called rubisco, which might just be the most abundant protein on the entire planet, grabs a CO2 molecule out of the air and attaches it to a 5-carbon starter molecule. Second, the factory uses its power packs. The energy from ATP and electrons from NADPH are spent to transform this new molecule into a stable 3-carbon sugar called triose phosphate, or TP. And finally, the regeneration phase. Most of the TP that was just made is used to rebuild the original 5-carbon starter molecule so the whole cycle can run again and again.
So we've made a simple 3-carbon sugar. You might be thinking, that's it? But this is where the story gets really incredible. That one little molecule is the starting point for almost everything else the plant needs to build its entire body.
This humble little molecule, triose phosphate, is one of the most important things in all of biology. You can think of it as the ultimate Lego brick. From this one simple piece, the plant can construct almost anything it needs.
The most obvious path is making carbohydrates. The plant can snap 2 of these 3-carbon TMP molecules together to make a 6-carbon sugar, like glucose. From there, it can link thousands of those glucose units into long chains to make starch, which is like its packed lunch for energy storage, or cellulose, the super tough stuff that builds cell walls and gives the plant its structure.
But it doesn't stop there. The factory can retool its assembly line. That same triose phosphate can be converted into glycerol. Other molecules pulled from the cycle can be turned into fatty acids. You put glycerol and fatty acids together, and what do you get? Lipids. Fats and oils that are essential for making cell membranes and for storing energy even more densely.
Now what about proteins? Well, the plant takes the carbon skeletons from the Calvin cycle and combines them with nitrogen that its roots absorb from the soil. This combination creates amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks for every single protein and enzyme the plant needs to live, including making more of the rubisco enzyme that keeps this whole assembly line running in the first place.
So when you really take a step back and look at the big picture, the consequences are just staggering. This one incredibly elegant process, happening silently inside every green leaf on the planet, takes the simplest possible ingredients, air, water, and sunlight, and uses them to build the foundation of nearly every single food web on Earth.
Think about that. Every single breath you take, every bite of food you eat, it all traces back to these microscopic green factories. This whole global system depends on the efficiency of this tiny assembly line. And that leaves us with one last, pretty important thought. What happens if things like temperature, CO2 levels, or the amount of light change? What happens if the planet's green engine starts to slow down?